Looks like that might be working now. I think it's working. Let me just double check. Oh, I think that's live. But what I want to quickly do is jump into it and update the thumbnail. If you all don't mind waiting for just a moment, and we'll get into it. Save. I think that is live. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. I'll just also post it on... I will also post it on Twitter that we're live. If you don't mind waiting just a second. It's good to have you all here. All right. Great. So, what we are talking about today is the miracles of John. Yes, that's working. Are you watching now? Okay. Everything's working. And we'll jump up into our presentation for today. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're talking about Christ's miracles of healing and how they relate to initiation, but also what they mean. Now, we are Lazarus. We are sick and in much need of healing. We are living off the derivative energies all the way from the fall, when we're born into the factical world that we're in. The 7 miracles relate to both the 7 days of creation, but in reverse. So the first miracle applies to the last day of creation, as we'll see, and so on. But also the 7 I ams, they apply to too. I am the vine. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the bread and the life, and so on. So those I ams relate to the faculties that make him up, including the ones that used to exist before the fall. And so I won't be going into this right now, but we'll go into later when yogis or Buddhists deal with the faculties. They're dealing with the lower derivative faculties when they talk about chakras or whatnot. That's the fallen state that they're dealing with and specializing in the fallen state. So without being rude to them, I mean, as we've talked about before, they're humanisms. And when they're dealing with those faculties, they are just going back to the prenatal state. They're not going towards the true future, which is, as we know, our beloved Lord Jesus and the new Adam, who is the new Adam. Not the old Adam, not trying to specialize in faculties of the old Adam and the fall, which is that's what they do. And so that's how these are related. It's the healing of the total man to move towards the divine. And so these these miracles are eternal and always will be. And Christ is performing them always in the background. And they relate to these healings that can happen to you. If you begin with the first miracle, the first in the wedding at Cana. And so this is what we're talking about today, the healing, the total healing. And so when we talk about the wedding of Cana, and this is available to you, is the point. But when we talk about the wedding of Cana, the water into wine, what we are, where we are, it is the last day of creation. So it's related to the festival that is the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the wedding of God to his creation. After he creates it, he takes the day of rest to see that it is good. And that is the Sabbath. That it's also the day that you're supposed to turn and look towards him, away from the creation, because we're no longer connected to him. We are now in the fallen state because of Adam's sin, primordially. And so when we come to this wedding at Cana, which is that last day of creation, we are in the fallen state. And so in the miracle, the story of the miracle, Mary tells Jesus, I'm just going to paraphrase here, that there is no more wine left. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do about it? But we're not going to go into the detail of that. There are deep meanings behind that, but we're just going to go into what we're going to talk about today in relation to the healing. But in terms of the events, what happens is Mary says to tell the wedding to do what he says, whatever he tells you to do. And that is to fill the urns with water, as you can see in the icon. And the next event is he turns the water into wine. So the first event is the water, the wine is run out. The second event is the water being poured into the urns at Jesus' direction. The next event is the water into wine. And then the one after that is the understanding that the second wine is better than the first. And so this wine is related to, and this miracle is related to, the healing of the future. Because you're running off the derivative first wine, which is life, which is also connected to why Mary talks about it and why Mary is the one who tells Jesus about it, because she's related to nature, virginal nature. And so this is about the healing or the access to the future. And so you can compare it also to the prodigal son, where really this first wedding is about that first turn back towards the Father, where the Father sees him. And this can happen to you, this wedding. As it relates to initiation, well, let's just talk about at first what's going on, in the sense that when you are making this turn back, you're walking away from that first wine of Adam, that first derivative will to power energy. You're turning away in the recognition that, as a lot of people face, it's also speaking about the truths of a wedding when the first love of Eros wears off. And then the true love, the second wine is actually better than the first in wedding, because this is the divine archetype that also applies to mortal weddings between man and woman. But when it applies to the life of man, when you reach sort of around 30 or whatnot, you begin to recognize, if you've won awards also and you've won things and got to the top of hierarchies, Jung realized this too, is that you sort of achieve what you set out to do, and it all sort of starts to seem pointless. That first wine, that will to power, that lust for moreness that drove you to begin with, which is the derivative fallen Adam, there's something missing that you start to detect. And this doesn't happen for everyone. Most people in modernity suffer this transformation into water, which is a lack of energy. But everyone that's involved in that kind of will to power scene in politics are all probably facing this now, is that maybe some of these people use it to grasp power, some of these figures that have large audiences, but they suck away from the audience beneath them. I'm just talking about in the basics of political online scene, I suppose you could talk about, of people on the right wing, but they feed off their audience. And you'll see more and more is that people start to turn towards Christ, who is the second wine, the true future, because they will recognize that they're being sucked away from, that they're being drained by someone else's lusty gaborness, someone else's will to power, but also their own. But what happens is a recognition that you don't have the forces to do this alone. That's really the recognition you have to go through, and you can't. It's just not the way it works. It's not allowed. If you do, it's just a specialization. You can't escape the old Adam alone. It has to be through the Lord and him helping you. Or else it'll just be a humanism like Buddhism and all these other things that help, that make you feel better, but ultimately aren't dealing with the divine outside temporality. They are temporal. They do deal with the transcendent self, but that's as far as it goes. And yeah. And so, because you have to clear destiny, which we talked about last week, you have to clear the derivative waters first. And that is, in a sense, what Jesus is asking you to do when we think about initiation. To regain access to the future, you have to let go of the past. Because you've got a projection of the future in the way, which is created by the old Adam, which is created by the derivative forces, which is even can come from your heredity that needs to be healed, which we'll get onto with the further miracles as we go through them. And so that must, for the future to be healed, you have to get rid of the derivative energies first. And so in initiation, that can happen. And we know that from last week when we talked about providence, that the forgiveness of sins clears that destiny. And because destiny is the Western word for karma. Karma, if I say karma, people think it's perennialist. It's just a word that the West knows. What goes around comes around, which is sin. Sin affects you. When we use the word destiny, it means that it's something that is determined by what has been. And so that's what the old Adam is, a determination of what has been, or horizontal heredity, and no free will, no providence. So it's projecting itself into the future from where it is before the wedding at Cana anyway. And there is no new life. It is what has been and degenerating slowly. And that's what modernity has come to, because it's been a degeneration back into these old forces of the Old Testament, these old forces of paganism. And we still like, we like the pagan bros. We just want them to come to see that providence is available to them. Even Nick Land understands this, and they all like Nick Land. So, but that's what this is. It's the healing of the future, the access to the future. When it comes to initiation, it's also related. It's multi-layered, its meanings, even its deepest mystical meanings, its Gnostic meanings, its magical meanings, its philosophical meanings, its surface literal meanings. And then the Orthodoxy has 4 different types of meanings that they talk about the Bible as, some chaps commented on, which is also equivalent to what I just said in terms of the layers of meaning. But this also has multiple mystic meanings, multiple at the deep ground of it that I won't, because it's revelation, because it's divine, it's always for you to find more. There's deeper levels, and it will always be that way. Not just at those levels of analysis or those levels of understanding, but also, say I'm talking about something mystic that's in the text and personal, there'll be more on that level of it. But the point is, in initiation, this is like that first turn. And over time, when you're beginning that concentration without effort, when you're turning the currents towards him of your will, you're choosing him freely, then what is exampled in this wedding of Cana and this last day, and the reason why this is like that, and why it's related to the prodigal son, is because the last day is, and as we can see here, it's related to the 7th day of creation. On that 7th day of creation, he withdraws for the sake of our freedom. And so he's finding you at the wedding at Cana at the state of freedom where you make the turn of the prodigal son, when the prodigal son turns towards the father. So he's allowed you that freedom, and it's sort of like your first turn back towards him. But in initiation, in mysticism, the event that's related to this doesn't happen straight away. And it might not necessarily happen exactly as the way I'm talking about. But if you're asking the Lord to guide you in the practices, for instance, you might experience as a seed, which is this wedding, which the apostles experienced as a doxa, a glory. And doxa is both illumination, but also life forces, and from providence, from the future. And the Bible quotes are here that they experience. It happens both in initiation, but also here is that Jesus says they perceived the great revelation of healing power, ten doxan or toa, or glory. And so when they see this transformation of the water into wine, the apostles aren't just, it's manifesting forth his glory from the future. So the potentiality of the final healing, the final raising of Lazarus, and then forward even further to Golgotha, what the apostles experience as doxa actually is the event of the healing as a seed. So the seed is planted now at the wedding of Cana for the future healing, but you also experience, and the apostles experience, that doxa of the later raising, the complete raising, for a moment. And it's important they know that. And they believed. I think it says, and they believed. The beginning of miracles and signs as the seed. But the true seed, of course, is the future, but it comes from the future. He is the future. Yes, it's complicated temporally. It's complicated. But this sign is the whole. Well, it comes from the whole of the raising. And it's also the seed at the same time. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. But in initiation, you may experience an ecstasy, an ecstasis, an out-of-bodiness, which is this doxa, which is when you're doing concentration without effort, which is also prayer. This is difficult to explain the phenomenology, but you essentially are sent to that final future, that because he is the future. As we've talked about previously, you have access to this future, which is the Lord, through you dissolving yourself, through you pouring this water, this movement in to make it still inside a vessel. And what is a vessel? It's you having monastic silence in concentration without effort. It's which is a practice. You can look at previous videos I've talked about for people who are watching. But you can see how that's all related. The Lord's telling you to do that. And so your will needs to be silent as monastic silence. And prayer moves towards that. So it doesn't happen straight away, but over time, say like 2 months in or 3 months into this process, you might experience that seed, that re-wedding of you to the Lord at the ground of your unconscious, the very start of it. But you experience an initial experience of that seed, an ecstasis and a return into black, where you're not feeling your body, you're out of body in black. And it's black like St. John of the Cross talks about in the Dark Night of the Soul. It's because the Lord's forces are, the uncreated light is so bright, and you're still in a state that needs to be healed over all the 7 miracles. It's experienced as black. So, and then you return and experience it happens very quickly, and you return and experience what I guess you could call manna, a taste of this glory, an initial festival, a festival. As is seen in this wedding at Cana, it is a festival. And what happens at a wedding? It's a festival, an initial seed festival for the rest of the mortal wedding that is to come. The glory is to come. The second wine of the wedding to your wife, after you've over the honeymoon period, is greater than the first. But the seed of it is in that festival, and you experience it in initiation as well. And so did the apostles here when it talks about their glory. But the glory is to come, but you get the first taste of it it also plants the seed because it is the future of the rest of it. But you only get that once, that festival, and then you move towards it. And so the greater glory of the wedding, just like a man wedded to his wife, happens with the development of love throughout the rest of their lives after that initial honeymoon period of biological forces. It's the synthesis of both of them. I think I've got that here somewhere. Or maybe that's in a slide further on. Yeah, you can see how it relates to the low wedding of the first Adam, which is sort of lust, and then procreation. And procreation and what has been of the past and the ancestors of looking up or looking into the past is synthesized together, in initiation anyway. But this happens for the apostles, the point is, and access is given to them as very special, of Jesus' very special chosen people, to the future. And they see the future and experience that and believe. But that belief, that faith, is something very special. It's something that's granted, but also can be freely sought. But it isn't a faith of asserted and accepted propositions. It's being granted the uncreated energies and glory. So that's the wedding at Cana. The reestablishment of contact of God and earth, of man and wife, and it's the archetype of many other things and many other depths. But in initiation, it is related to the first turn and the first practices when Mary speaks to Jesus and says about the need for the new wine, which happens to you, and you may be gifted a sort of close to the beginning ecstasis or ecstasy. Again, it's not ecstasy in the low use of the word. It's in metaphysically ecstasy. You might see the seed of the future that you are to be, which can be experienced. So if people are going through it, and people are starting to experience some of the phenomenology that I talk about in these videos, so it is important to talk about some of the other phenomenology so they know what's going on, because it took me a long time to work out what happened. It is the meaning of existence. There's no greater glory than to have a closer relationship with the Lord. But let's move on to the next slide. The next healing. So the healing of the nobleman's son. This is about the healing of the past, of heredity. So collective sin of heredity, not individual sin, which we'll see relates later to one of the other healings. The next one, I think. The lame healing. So this is a really interesting one. The nobleman's son in John's Gospel is called, I think the word is basilikos. And what in ancient times a basilikos was, is a nobleman. But in those times of the Old Testament, those noblemen had no I. And as we know, Christ is the I am. And the seed force, as we see in this, it talks about that. I think it does anyway. He is that I am, behind your I am. And in those times, and even Evola talks about this when he talks about the Imperium, is that noblemen don't have their own I. That term means kingsman. It means that you are actually a clone of the king. You're part of the king's principality, and his demon kind of possesses you in a way. And so how this works is through heredity, that slow weakening, and this also is connected to the weakening of aristocratic bloodlines. This happens because this explains it partly because they don't have their own spiritual development. They're not the spiritual head of the family. And so he is, again, essentially the pawn of a wider distributed cognition, a wider egregore, you could call it, of a temporal system coming from the initiative of the king. So he doesn't have his own initiative. Who grants initiative? Christ does. Clean initiative, anyway. So that's what's going on here. And you can see that in the change of the name. So and his son has that because of hereditary sin, because Golgotha hasn't happened yet. So these are also signs that point towards Golgotha as well. And so that nobleman asked for Jesus to heal his son, who is taken ill. But that illness is because of this, because physicality of the son is connected to the actions of the father. If the father's has no initiative, then there will be a physical weakness in the son. In Old Testament times, that's how it works. So this healing has to do with a retrochronic healing, which means Jesus does the healing backward in time because of the father's collective sin. So the father has to make a deep acknowledgement of Jesus, who is the I am and provides those forces of the I that he is, because he's the seed of the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus asks him to. I can't remember what the exact quote is. Do I have it there? Except ye see wonders, ye will not believe. So it has to come from within. You must recognize the Christ first. And so he does. And then Christ, he says, your son is healed. You can go. And at that very moment, his son was healed, which he finds out later. But it was required that the father did that. The father had to do that. The father had to acknowledge it because of his sin, because of that bloodline. He had to accept it because he's the leader of the household, and it's connected in horizontal heredity. So what this is really is, and what you have to do, so your kids, it's changing the illnesses of heredity to the healing of heredity. And this happens when you're the head of a household too. You can hurt your household by your lack of spirit and your lack of development and lack of connection to the true father. You have to acknowledge not heredity. And this is again a healing of the fall. It's a healing of something that happened in the fall where the father becomes heredity. It becomes a similarity to who came before you. And what is that? A similarity to the original Adam, who is corrupted because of primordial sin. And so this is a healing of that. It's healed in totality in Golgotha, but in this healing, it has to happen to the individual. And this is a prototype or an archetype of this healing that can always happen for you because Golgotha has occurred and the healings have occurred. But this transformation of the father-son relationship is showed in this. But what it is a requirement that you acknowledge your true father, because you're the image and likeness of God, as the creation story says. And that is what, with Jesus, as Jesus goes back into the past and heals that, and that heals the son. But it comes from the acknowledgement of the Father, of the true Father. And you can also see this in St. John's Gospel when, after he acknowledges Christ essentially deep in his being as the Father, his Father, who he's really descends from and has to work towards to become like the new Adam, not the old Adam. John changes the words that he uses to describe the man. He stops calling him Basilikos and starts calling him Anthropos, human being, because of the acknowledgement of the true archetype. I say archetype is a temporalish word, but what all that means is simply true father, true thing that you descend from above and are supposed to become like. not just like, but that's what theosis is in Orthodoxy. They really understand that. And so also he changes the name. Once he gets home, he changes the descriptive name of the nobleman to head of the household once he gets home. And so this also points to this idea, or this truth, that man as a spiritual leader of the household affects the whole household. And that household receives him, and illnesses are created based on, if that man is a true man of spirit and Christ, then your wife will be obedient to you, because you will have authority, because you will be like, to be capable of and to know is authority. And when that's related to Christ, it's something within you that's greater than what we can determine from physicality and the five senses in their low Adam-like state. You have something. It's something dox is granted to you. Other people notice that at an unconscious level. So that's what happens. It's a healing of heredity, collective sin. I think I got every point there that I've got in this slide, but no responsibility, child weak, healing of sickness, horizontal heredity, that reinstatement of the heredity of the new Adam. Yeah, I think I spoke about everything there. And so, and there's truth in that. That's one part I missed. There's truth in that, is that the Lord doesn't want you to be merely like the king's man is, a technical supplicant in a hierarchy of power. He wants a hierarchy of authority where, because the people that are ruling have true substance, have true essence, have true God with them, and are united with him and close to him, which gives them true substance, they naturally will be followed because people sense the good in those people. Hierarchy is a good thing, but it needs to be a hierarchy of authority. It's a transformation of this illness, because you deny Christ when you throw away your collective, when you throw yourself away in your free collaboration with him and in his free hierarchies, you jump into the collective rage of communism or mustache man or whatever that may be that's collective, and throw all responsibility away. You enter an egregore and it possesses you. And so there's a truth there with the king. That's what can happen with a king. But that doesn't happen in Christian kingship. Kingship is great. You want a king, but he is in a proper hierarchy of authority. Then it's not a degenerate power structure that we face today. So, yeah. Do you want to be possessed? So he had to, the nobleman had to accept it. Not the demon possession of the cult of kings, but in a free collaboration based on the acceptance of Christ as the king and the true father. So you have to do that too. And so there's a connection there with I am the way, the truth, and the life, because when you acknowledge that he is the true ideal and the new Adam, of course, you start walking towards the way, truth, and life. You will towards him. He's the will. He's the truth to which my will aspires. The way to which my will is constantly trying to catch up with and understand through for active free collaboration, and the life from which my will emerges, from my will is launched. That's what we aspire to in trying to follow divine will and providence. And we'll get to that life, which other healings are involved with. So that's very important. Next, healing of the lame. So this one's related to forgiving sins. And I don't need to read that. And which day of creation was that? Maybe I do need to read it. Fifth day of creation, third miracle. I am the door. This is related to will and ensouled movement, which happens on that day of creation. And so this lame man, even though he's been without legs his whole life, this particular miracle, for reasons that are very complicated, that I don't want to go into, that perhaps we can talk about in the second half of the stream, which will be a conversation in the Discord, and you can become a member, and we can have that and when we have the group discussion after we finish this stream, we can talk about that. But it's very esoteric as to the reasons why. But this is about individual sin, this one. This man is lame because of individual sin. And we know that because Jesus talks about it. Sin no more and nothing worse may befall you. It's about egoism and a lack of care for conscience, which is related to, and humanity and the world, because you've unplugged yourself from that world movement, which is related to that the creation, or the day of creation. But it's also related to the pool. The pool has 5 arches, you can see here. That's related to the wholeness of the human organism that he's also disconnected from. And that wholeness of the human organism is when the 5 currents of the will are made into, and you see there's 5 here, 5 currents of the will made into 5 wounds, and they're riveted to Revelation and the 10 Commandments, which is, what is that? It's a development of conscience, which is your transcendent self, which is, connected to what Jung talked about when he talked about the self, but it's beyond that. The total man. Will you be made whole in a total way? And that is to heal the will, to heal the low movement, which is also connected to primordial sin. But in this chap's sense, it's connected to, but it's the world and outside. It's outside temporality, which is the angel, and it's also disconnected from the will of the world, because you can see that in the fact of the pool, which the lame man is next to, and people go into this pool and an angel will heal them. But he can't because he's lame. He can't walk, and no one will help him, and that's because of his sin previously. That no one will help him because he hasn't cared about world, nor has he cared about his own angel. An outside temporality. So he's egoistic. It's about the individual. And that's what we are in the Adam state, in the first Adam state. It comes from also the past and what has been. Our sins hold us back and create a destiny which forces the future that we're to be, which ends up being just a projection of the past. So the sin has to go, and that happens through forgiveness, of course, too. But in this particular miracle, you can see that 2 different things that he needs to make up for that he's sinned against. He's sinned against conscience, which is your guardian angel. He sinned against humanity in the past. And you can see that when Christ says, rise and take up your pallet. Rise is a healing of the vertical, a healing towards the 5 arched pool by riveting the will by the forgiveness of sins, which that arbitrary will created. As you might have seen in previous streams, that arbitrary will is a factor that's tied up with sin and related to the Luciferian, because it's about your arbitrary gain and will to power, grasping at the expense of others, trying to advance at the expense of others. And so this is the healing of that. But it is important to understand that the healing of ensouled movement for this man is horizontal as well. It's about you living on the earth. You're not checking out. Your legs aren't crossed like the yogi. Because someone asked also in one of the comments, said, can I do breathing exercises from yogiism? Or I didn't say yogiism, just breathing exercises and crossing of my legs. The thing about crossing of the legs is when you lift your legs off the floor, that is a pose that is related to the Luciferic state that they seek, which is a checking out. It's nirvana. It's not about saving. The Lord, it's about depersonalization. It's about not having human feet anymore. And as we know, the Lord is both man and God. He came so we'd have life abundantly. And so when we do our practices and our prayers, we sit in a chair because that's a synthesis of the active and passive, which is what you're supposed to be in the final analysis, is the saving person that's both in the divine world and in the world. Yes, we're not of this world, but we're here to save it. That's the state that Christ was. So that's why, no, you shouldn't use the cross-legged pose because your feet are off the ground, seeking to check out in nirvana, not to save. And those poses matter. So, and the breath, I'll talk about it at a different time, but basically no, because the breath is supposed to be connected with the Lord moving your breath later on, not you doing it like the Übermensch. So, yeah. Went on a bit of an aside there, but the point is, you're in egoism, you unplug yourself from the world. But in your unconscious, you're like a whirlpool in a wider sea. That whirlpool goes outside your body. Everything you do, your will, your feeling, and your thought is in that whirlpool. So as an egoist, you become rigid and lame, and you can't move anymore because you're not connected to that. So what is healed here is both because of his sin. But the sins are healed, are forgiven. And the Lord does this. And you can go to my Forgiveness is Practice video, look for that. And that is the process that we're talking about here. But what is restored, how does this relate to initiation? Well, in initiation, and it's a long process, but what is restored is the divine faculty of revelatory action, of intuition, which is related to will and movement and divine will. You begin to be able to sense, because it goes because as you move towards the new Adam, you leave the old Adam and his sins, and you go to it's like you have the faculties of before the fall. That's the idea. And so, not the idea, it's the fact. It's the fact that I know well. And so you have an understanding of conscience, which is conscience, divine will. In the past, people talked a lot about negative conscience, where you'd feel something was wrong before you'd do it. And in the normal factical modern state, you might get that sometimes, but it's tied up with all your impulses and such, so which is connected to your sin. So through forgiveness and through the abandoning of sin and through riveting of the will and through the 3 oaths, you start to move away from the arbitrary, and you can trust your instinct then. But that takes time. You have to stop sinning first. You have to ask for forgiveness for everything first. Then this becomes available and it can be trusted, because it might not be providence. So sometimes conscience, which is your guardian angel, when it's outside, anyway, outside temporality. Yeah, when you're in a low state, you can't trust that voice. But as you progress in terms of the phenomenology of it, there's a discernment you get where you can tell that is an impulsion from the divine, from the Lord. And that's related to the spiritual faculties I've talked about before, which is like mystic touch. And positive conscience feels like a positive impulsion, essentially. But more and more that can be trusted as you purify yourself. But you have to go through purification first. And so this healing is about that restoration. And Christ is always doing that healing again. And that's why it occurs in initiation as well. So, yeah, that's the faculties of will that are restored here. And the will becomes a way of, it turns into a sense once you rivet yourself to revelation and the 10 commandments and the 3 oaths. So that's how it relates to initiation. And you can see that through rise and take up your palette. It's both horizontal and vertical. So it is related to how you treat people in the world as well. You have to, that's why you have to go through forgiveness, but also bless people. Like I've talked about in previous videos, blessing people you walk past. The yappy devil will say, fatty, or whatever, but you bless them, bless people you walk past. It all not works. It all matters, and it all has an effect, especially when you're involving yourself and your relationship is close with the Lord. You ask the Lord to bless them, and he will. You're collaborating with the Lord. And so what a great gift you can give to that person without them even knowing, because you don't want anything in return. You're just doing it because this is what we do. So, and that stuff works. Prayer works. That's why in the Discord we have a prayer request room, which you can go and become a member at scottmanu.com/membership. Not meaning to put an ad in here, but yeah, it's a great blessing to have internet archipelago where you can ask for prayers and people that have like mind can pray for each other. It's beautiful. So you can go there and join the fellowship. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, they're feeding the 5,000. This one it gets more complicated here, but this one is also related to the nighttime walking on water. They're connected. It's also connected to the Lord's Prayer. And all of these have a loose connection, which isn't completely clear, to each petition of the Lord's Prayer, because there are 7 petitions as well of the Lord's Prayer, as there are 7 days of creation, as there are 7 miracles. But it's a looser connection with the Lord's Prayer. But it's connected to the give us this day our daily bread. And it's related to the 2 contexts as well that we talked about last week. And so the bread that's given that you pray for is a restoration of the body's destroyed forces. But also the bread is spiritual. But the miracle actually occurred. It also is a providing of actual bread. And that bread also happens and is provided physically and factically. But it's both. It's of love and what occurs in communion. But also it is bread, because you need bread and the things of life, because you're also human, and so was Christ. So, but you need the things that you interact with to be taken out of the context that is Luciferian, that is serpentine. And the Lord can do that. And he does that through his telos, because telos is purpose, but that means context. It doesn't mean what we see in the West, which is some end that everything is a tool for. It's not mechanical like that. So this feeding of the 5,000, the people come hungry not just for food. They're hungry for the Spirit. They're hungry for the love that's provided, the willed good. They are spiritually unsatiated and need nourishment in both ways. And so this duplication speaks to both a hierarchical principle that is established in this, because it is. When you deal with the angels, because there is a thing in Protestantism where they want to just pray to God. Well, the thing is, the angels help with, so you're not completely obliterated. Because if you experienced an ecstasy without some sort of, or the forces of God without some sort of mediation to begin with, or which you do through your slow movement towards him, the ladder, I wouldn't say you could be obliterated, but you would be certainly very, very fearful, because you wouldn't know what it was. And so the angels do the same thing as the apostles do here, is they pare it down. They pare it down for communion. But that doesn't mean you can't climb the ladder up. That doesn't mean you pray to the Lord, and you don't pray to the Lord, and you are most of the time. But the angels help you at intermediary stages. And all they want nothing more than to bring the marriage about. And they move out of the way as soon as the Lord comes. But they're also the ladder up. And so that happens too on earth, is that the religion is there to help marry you to God, but also so you're not obliterated You're not obliterated by what's given, because you also have to live, because you're still living here. We're here to save, remember? And so the greatest experiences that you can experience in mysticism, if you were just to experience that without some sort of understanding, which this video is, and sort of stepping up to it, yeah, you would be very scared, or that you'd be very, I don't know exactly what you'd be, but it's not necessarily for everyone either. But that being said, we have faith in humanity that everyone can move towards this, and they will have to eventually. And it comes to a question, which you see in this miracle, is what do you want to be? And it's so key here. Do you just want to turn up to communion and to have the nice feeling from drinking the wine and having the bread, and then go back to your factical modern life and sort of just use the Lord? And so you revolve him around your life rather than being an apostle, making him the center of your life at the top of the hill, but not making him a king, which they try to do when Jesus duplicates the bread. That's the miracle, is that he's given 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he hands them to the apostles, and then that's duplicated down. And they try to make him a king. They want to make Christ a king, and he withdraws to the mountains. And then between that and then another feeding, Christ, the experience of walking on the water happens, which we'll talk about next. But these are really interrelated here. But it's so important, is that you've got to ask yourself, am I making God a tool? And it's so meaningful when Christ says this to Peter, is that, do I have it here? Will ye also go away? And the proper response really is never. You should ask yourself that question. Is that and so Peter answers for all the apostles when he says that, because they have a different relationship to him, because they've seen him from within. But are we just the people that go to church on weekends, like the multitude is, who gets the spiritual food and goes back to all the new Adam's sinful desires? Or do we want total transformation, as I think the Orthodox understand better than most? Because they are about that. They are about that asceticism, about recognizing that we want to be the nighttime apostles. We don't just want the 5 senses that the 5 loaves of bread also speak to, or the twilight senses, which the 2 fish speak to too, of emotion and the sense of value. But we want the divine faculties of the new Adam, and as you can experience in initiation, which is nothing more than the raising of Lazarus. This is initiation. You are to be Lazarus. So, but yeah, you face that stark choice, and you have to make that choice. You make the rest of your life revolve around him at the ground of your psyche, because he is at the ground of the subject and the object, the Logos. The Sacred Heart and the heart of the world are the Logos. He's down there at the very depths, at the very base, and you discover that when you look deep enough, when you go through this. Deeper than Nietzsche looked, deeper than Jung looked, deeper still to find love, willed good. If you want to, it sometimes helps to say willed good, because people think love, they just think, I don't know, something that's not actually related to philosophy, something that is the depth of reality. And so that raw love and the raw experience you can have connected to the divinity and God is hierarchically pared down, with Jesus at the top of the mount and the apostles after and the multitude under. That doesn't mean if you don't have faith in that multitude to one day have the night time from within and these faculties restored, you don't have faith in the resurrection. You're Judas. You think Judas didn't have faith in the multitude. He also seeks the power to make him king. And there's the difference in the relationship too, is that if you want to make Jesus king as power hierarchy in reality, you're denying the gift that he offers you, which is the seed force, the seed of the kingdom of heaven, which is he wants you to collaborate as a free son, not as a piece of technology. That's why on the seventh day he withdraws. Because if he was still the mover in what is moved, you would just be, again, it's like technology. No question in the matter. That's not how it works. He withdraws so you can be someone he loves, a beloved son, beloved daughter. That's why he withdraws. Or else it would just be, there'd be no one to love, and he is love. So it's so important here to recognize why he withdraws to the mountains. Because he wants them to find him within themselves and collaborate. That's why he came. The true future, the true seed. And so this is also about, as I've got here, the disciples took up the mighty, enlightening, warming, life-giving force of cosmic word made flesh and passed it down as reflection. They are like the moon. He's the sun, and the people are stars. But when the communion is granted to the people, for a moment they're like him. They're like Christ. They radiate energy. Zoe, virginal Zoe, as a life force that's not movement created out of polemic, because a lot of your life you'll find is driven by wanting to best someone else. But this comes from outside. It comes from outside temporality. This love, this virginal. You get it when you pray. You get this. I got it before I started this stream. Every stream before I start, I pray and I wait for this seed force before I can even start. Because it's live to a lot of people. 1,000 people watch this. So you want to know that you should be doing it at that time, or should you do more preparation? But the point is, it's there and it's virginal, but it's outside temporality. Whereas other people are just driven by egregores, you know. The idea is to be driven by the food. But anyway, the point is, the pieces that are left over from the divvying out of the Lord's food, both spiritual and physical, are real. And this happened as a miracle. It's not just a spiritual thing. It's not just a symbol. It happened. It's both. And they experienced both. But they, for a second, also have a taste of the spiritual, a pared down taste of this, I guess you could say a pared down doxa, but a pared down taste as communion gives in its magic. I don't even like using that word magic, but in its divine magic, or its divine miraculous. And they radiate it. They're not a emptiness at ground anymore for that time. They're a star. In their individual way, they radiate it until they need to come back to communion again. But do you want to be a moon or a star? I think the moon also is then there to save. I think all of us eventually are going to have to be that sooner or later. To be that saving force. That's the crown of thorns. It's not to check out a nirvana. It's to bring back and help people. Even if people might make fun of it, because they have no idea what you're talking about. Who cares? These things are the depth of reality. I've experienced it directly. No, that is the case. It is certainly true. As amen means, it is certainly true. That the Lord is the ground of the subject and the object. But let's go on. So I think we've talked about everything there. Yeah, I think I've talked about everything. Yeah, there is a hierarchical principle, and that shows it. So, but let's talk about this. This is so important. Walking on water. Walking on water. There's a deep truth to initiation here, because you experience the daytime effects in initiation that we were talking about just there. You experience communion every day, the effects of... Well, in initiation, let's just talk about how that's related to that miracle. In initiation and Christian mysticism, you're doing the practice, I'm not sure how long for, and I think a good start to the practice, because I talk about the breath and attending the breath and praying at the same time. But if you can't do that at the start, you should, on your walks, you should pray the Lord's Prayer or the Jesus Prayer while you're bringing your attention to your breath and at the speed of the breath in your head. And then in the morning, for half an hour, you can do the concentration without effort. But the idea is to unite those. But you might not be able to do that at the start. So a person that came in to the second half of the stream last week asked that question, and because it takes time to gain concentration skills, and you might not be able to do it all at the start. So that's a way of starting, and that's basically how I started. So doing that, the attending of the point and all, and those practices are in a playlist that I've got on the front of my YouTube called Initiation Start Here. There's a bunch of practices in there. But you can separate them. The point being, I can't remember why I brought that up. Oh, yeah. How does it relate to initiation? Well, in the daytime, you face that. Every morning you are granted these life energies. Over time, at the start, you experience, as we'll talk about in some of the other miracles, the forces of the first Adam and the low creation, they have to be drained first, the first life. So you will experience at time a draining of the will. And so if that occurs, that's normal. But there's an expansion and a contraction that goes on. And people will notice that sometimes they feel grace and sometimes they don't in the Christian life, the same thing. But what that is a spiritual contraction and expansion that St. John of the Cross also talks about in the Dark Night of the Soul. But it doesn't take that long. So you could even say it's probably 4 days of one and then 4 days of the other. That's just something I pulled out of my head. But you'll notice a contraction and then an expansion. And what is really happening to you, which we'll talk about later too, it's a dying and a living. What happens to Lazarus all at once in initiation happens over time for us. And so you're like the tree. A tree contracts and expands, contracts and expands. That's how it works for plants. As it works for plants, so does it work for us in the spirit. And so in initiation, you will experience daily, unless you're in a contraction, but you'll still basically experience daily some sort of effect. But you have this communion, and these life forces are provided over time. It's a thing that takes time to develop. But as you'll find out if you join the Discord, two people are already experiencing what I've been talking about after not that long, after only I think 2 months of the concentration, and also the Lord's Prayer and forgiveness practices. So 2 to 4 months, you should notice something. But yeah, it's happening for them, which is a great blessing. And I'm very glad, very, very glad to hear. And again, as I've always said, these are no different really from what monastics are doing already. You can find reflections of this in the way they talk about it. I'm always watching Orthodox videos for that reason. So, yeah. Point is, you are fed daily. But this nighttime thing is important because you're going through and you're putting the Lord first and going through doing all the things necessary to make him the anchor of your whole life and the sun around which your whole life revolves, and every practice and goal must be a mere symptom of walking towards him. Weightlifting, whatever it is, you have to figure out a way to make it just a symptom, whatever the goal is. Because there's an Orthodox channel called Orthodox Aesthetic, and it needs to be with weightlifting. It's like a hamster wheel, right? When you go to the gym, it's a hamster wheel. Firstly, you can't listen to music. It's demonic. So, and you can't just organize it like a goal. Oh, okay, this goal is for the sake of this and that. It needs to be direct in the same way as I'm not going to go into much detail on this because it's aside the point, but you basically need to implement prayer right then and there into what you're doing with the weightlifting, not just abstract goal that I'm doing this to protect my family and to protect God or protect the godly. It has to be direct, like this is direct. I started walking to church to pray for the byproduct, not for the sake of walking to church to pray, which is right there with the practice, and you arrive there in the same day. And the byproduct happens to be that it's good exercise and you lose weight, right? It can't be for that goal. But it also is so immediate there with walking to church to pray. It occurs every day, every time you do it. You have to find a way for that to work with weightlifting as well. So prayer would have to be part of it. It'd have to be actually prayer in some way. And you can do that. I was thinking about doing a video, so I might do that eventually, but it's not that important for me, but I want to help them make it something that's not hamster wheel and demonic. And looking in the mirror. At least that. Don't look in the mirror. It's vanity. It feeds back upon itself. But anyway, aside the point, let's move on to walking on water. So, this follows a sequence that also happens in initiation. The apostles are on a ship. They're shaken by cosmic forces, waves of sea, which are, the sea are, your equilibrium is upset, threatened equilibrium. That occurs. The spirit is felt in a very real way too. And you will have self-awareness in sleep. That's what happens in the nighttime faculty. So this miracle is so connected to what happens to them. Of course, because apostles are beyond initiates. But they're granted everything by Christ. And so you can see here, threatened equilibrium, but also forces pushing in a specific direction, the winds. But yeah, you experience this in initiation because you're going towards you after this happens. You could even consider it like the middle of the process. And some people have already experienced this like I have, the two people I talked about, because it's only a recent thing for a lot of people. But like this miracle is in the middle of the process, it also occurs, I guess you could say, in initiation in the middle of the process. As you're purifying yourself, this becomes possible. And you have to go through the same thing because you're making a deep transformation, because you're making in your unconscious, because you... Let me just talk about faith for a second. As you'll see is written down on the slide is faith is not an accepted proposition. Faith is something deeper than that. Your acceptance of Christ as the I am behind your I am, it is I. It is the I. It is that I am. He is that seed of the kingdom of heaven. This is a debate that happens in theology. Is it the will first, or is it a grace that's given? But he can be freely chosen as an act of will. And that's how it at least happens in initiation anyway. So it starts with that will, but that free turn towards him happens in the domain of the deep unconscious, which is why it happens in a half sleep state, which is why it happens to the apostles in sleep, turning towards him. They face the cosmic forces of will to power, of all these different things moving through them, because your unconscious, like I said, is a whirlpool. Your thought, feeling, and the will are connected to this thing. And because this Descartesian subject-object divide has been reconnected in the previous miracle, those cosmic forces are flowing through you. And so this is what happens to the apostles. And when the experience happens to you like it does to them, you have to find the courage to face it, to what you see. You see the unconscious show certain things to face it and to face the very real experience as a mystical fact of these forces moving through you as mystical touch. You can sense, you can feel the movement, and also visually. But yeah, it's mainly the movement, right? And of course, in the instance that this happens, that force that is the courage to face it is him. He's the seed force. But of course, when you experience this, what you do is pray, the Lord's Prayer. If any dream happens to you, I saw recently Jonathan Pageau talking about Tucker Carlson being scratched by a demon. If ever there's a force or anything like that, especially when you're a Christian and you're going through initiation, Christ moves these things aside. He walks on the water. He controls these forces. But you have to be moving towards him. You have to make the free choice towards him in this domain. And so this is really the moving from the will to power and that being removed. This is like the halfway point, you could consider it, in initiation. Is that he becomes a true ground at the depth of your psyche, not the empirical self. You could consider it like that. And the same thing happens to the apostles. They make the choice to make him the son, not the first Adam's derivative son, as the will to power, which is Cain. Cain is will to power, if you want to think about it that way. So, yeah, that's what's granted to you is faith. But this going through this experience is key to that. Because when you've been doing your concentration exercises, you're essentially turning the light around. You're looking towards him. As he says, can you not watch with me for an hour? He's talking to his apostle. He's talking to you. And so what are you doing when you're looking at this I amness that you are? You're looking towards the ground. And of course you do that with prayer, but that's monastic silence. That's emptying the cup. But with prayer, you start with prayer, and then the temptations eventually become silenced. But it's an opportunity for temptations too. But we'll go into that at a different time. It's related to the passion. But yeah, this occurs. I just want to say that this occurs. But the point is too, is that it's also a test of the forces that he doesn't, when the Lord communicates with you, he's got your moral development in mind. He wants your free collaboration, which is what the acceptance of the courage and of having faith is. It's finding it within yourself at the ground of your being, which is what this nighttime thing is. It's what the apostles have that the multitude doesn't have. Which it's a possibility for everyone to have that, though, to make him the center. By giving that time, by stopping sin and doing all the things that are necessary for religion and that I've talked about before in initiation. Make that possible. But it's finding that seed force within. And that occurs in this domain, which you're closer to in the nighttime, which is why it happens not in your day consciousness, but at nighttime. And you'll probably experience it in a sort of half-awake state. But there's a reason why monastics will wake up in that midnight hour, because you're closer to him in that midnight hour, because he draws closer to the earth in that midnight hour. And so there's a reason why it happens at night. But that courage that is granted to you to face these cosmic forces is him saying, I am that I am. And so you pray. And this miracle occurs, and after this, your experience is richer. The seed force is restored. He becomes your seed force, not the derivative seed force. And you'll find that is related to experience. I mean, it's an event that happens to you. But also, I think that he kind of becomes master of your dreams, really, after that. Master of the sleeping state. And I think at least for me anyway, after that happened, you're experiencing his phenomenology in the morning much more when you wake up. So it's also part of cleaning out that the unconscious, I think you could say, when it relates to initiation. But it's so important that it occurs because it's the true understanding of what the I that you are is, and that freedom that he gave you, that freedom that the multitude were surrendering when they were asking him to be a factical king. And by factical, I mean physical, in physical reality, to make them his extension. No, he wants you to find him within you, which is that courage that he grants. But it starts with moving yourself away from the first Adam, which all these other miracles have been dealing with. So that's what this is about, becoming like an apostle. But you also have to, it's also sort of to do with, as you start to accept that you can help Christ, more of the way opens to you as well. And so you could also connect the miracle with, because the apostles participate in handing out the bread, they're also granted these miracles because they're also being like Christ in saving. They're not just seeking the experience like the multitude, also, and which is Luciferian in a way. It's seeking it and going back to satanic life and the will to power. But also it's kind of nirvanic. It's like the humanist religions. It's seeking it just to escape. Or do you become the moon? Do you become the middle saving force where your feet are on the ground? They're not in the up pose like a yogi. You're actually saving the world. You're actually helping other people find this I am, that I am. Yeah. And so by doing that, that helps awaken these spiritual faculties that are him, the new Adam, which all these miracles relate to, the different I am statements. I am the vine. I am the bread of life. All these different things he is. And that he's the depth of being. Underneath the low faculties, underneath at the ground of creation is him. Over the top of it is the old Adam. Is put there by primordial sin. And so, let's move on. But yeah, if this happens to you, of course, pray. You will know that anyway. It comes about through prayer unceasing, which is something you should establish. When you're doing a walk every day, pray the Jesus prayer, or particularly the Lord's Prayer, because it's for everyone, not just you. The Lord's Prayer in time with the breath, because you have to reconnect it to vital forces in the body, is important. So you want to establish a state in the unconscious of praying unceasingly. I think the Orthodox talk about this too. Or at least there's Russians who have talked about it before. That happens through doing it in the daytime. So the prayer, if you're praying all the time, there's no reason to let your mind run. It doesn't do any good. You might as well just be praying as you're walking and attending the breath, and you do it as connected with the automatic in and out breath, not controlling the breath, but just attending it and doing prayer in time with that breath while your attention is on it. If you get distracted, you just bring it back and continue your Jesus prayer or your Lord's Prayer or your Hail Mary prayer. That throughout the day establishes a praying unceasingly, establishes the currents of your will, which is connected to your wish, which establishes contact with this I am that he is, and he comes closer because you're the arbitrary nature of what you are, and because of your wish is looking upward towards him. He has to decide to do it, though. It's not a technique. It's a way, because it's a relationship. You're not dealing with something that if I do A, B happens. He he responds to the language of moral logic, or because he is your father. So you need to keep framing it so you understand, because he needs you to understand. And once you understand that, and once you keep framing it appropriately, then he will do it. Because he's teaching you. It's all with your moral development in mind. So that's how it works. But let's go to the next miracle. Wow, we're already at the end. Oh, wait, no, we're not. One more. Okay. I am the light of the world. Kingdom come. So this one is to do with the restoration of the light, the restoration of true sight, which before the fall existed. The transcendent self and empirical self were connected. What happened when Adam did what he did was the empirical sight became cynical. So it was just your five senses, and I guess you could call it Canian sight too. Just seeing the material. But there are twilight senses, you could call them as well, which the two fishes sort of stand for. Unless you... sight became cynical unless you use these humanistic developments, which are polluted, unfortunately, because they're still related to the first Adam, not the new Adam, not Christ. And so, with this miracle, the blind man, it's not to do with his past. It's not to do with sin. He's blind for the sake of providence, for the sake of showing you and us what will be. He was blind to facticity of the physical world, so he wouldn't be polluted by it. But you can see, I mean, these are very mysterious things that you can delve into. And like I said, even mystically at the deepest level, there's more and more that will always be unpacked from this. But the pool that he washes in, well, let's talk about the day of creation first in terms of what we're dealing with. The second day of creation. This is the separation. It's the Lord is the light. He's also all these other things, but he is the light of the world. He is the Logos. He is the sending that connects the sender to the receiver. I don't like those words. He is the loving that connects the lover to the loved. The real, or the multiplicity to the thought of God, to the ideal. Again, these are Platonic terms, which I hate using, but it helps people who like philosophy to understand what's going on. So, on the second day of creation, he divided the waters. He is the firmament that also divides the waters above and below, the movement above and below, or the receptive above and below. And so this pool that's there is also him in terms of what has been, in terms of the Logos reflection below the firmament in creation. Because there's fallen things below the firmament, but there's also him below the firmament, which the pool relates to. The pool's name means sent. What is sent of, in Heideggerian terms, what is sent of being that is of essence? What is brought in that is of essence? And so what's connected with that is the restoration of the two seers, the sight of the transcendent self. And what this means with its connection to initiation is the sight so not just divine instinct, but also the different faculties, spiritual touch, but also what Jung calls active imagination in initiation is when it's cleaned, when it's purified, when this is fully restored by God, by the Lord, it's overlaid over what you see factically, over what you see empirically in terms of the senses. And it reveals through its light the water that has already been sent. It reveals through its light God working both in the creation, in its coinciding with what happens in events in the world, and also what that transparency shows you. Because active imagination is something that can show you things symbolically or otherwise, but it's over that. So you could call it Gnostic. Again, don't get scared by that word. It just means knowing, but divine knowing. It's not like Gnosticism is bad. It's all that stuff that connected with that word is bad. Because if it's on its own, without mystic and the loving relationship with God, and without mystic touch and spiritual touch, as we talked about before, in mysticism, without doxa, it's pointless and nonsense. It's dead. It's knowing without the ground of religion, which is mysticism. It's dead. So all that stuff is dead, or derivative, or polluted, unless it's connected with doxa, unless it's connected with the ground, the essence. Without mysticism, all this stuff is dead. Anything related to anything. Without the raw contact with God at the deepest level, this stuff is all dead. But this particular miracle is dealing with that. The very next step after that of the receptive, the very next step after, which you see in my stream on different mysticisms, the very next step is the hay of Yod Hey Vav Hey. It's the receptive principle. It is water that reflects that first mystic touch, that first spiritual touch. But anyway, I'm not really talking about the faculties there. I'm just trying to articulate what occurs and what's restored. And that's seen in the Bible quote where it says, "Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh to thee." You have this Gnostic sight, and you see me physically. So the transcendent self and the empirical self has been restored. The vision of the pre-fallen state is what's been given to the man that was blind. So that's what occurs. And it's also related to, as you can see in my notes here, is that it's healing with the aid of two waters, the spittle closest to the word, accompanying and mirroring it, which was mixed with earth, and the water from the pool, which means sent, which flowed forth from the earth, as reflected the Logos inside temporality. And so this is also all related to, well, I've sort of talked about that already. But here's an important quote. "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind." So what's he talking about here? Those who see are those who have faculties that pre-Christ coming religions or humanistic practices have specialized in. That's the sight of the old Adam, though, and corrupted. And so a lot of those ways also don't work anymore, as we know from the last prophecy of the Oracle of Delphi was, "My waters have run dry." But in terms of what the yogis do and such, this is what this applies to as well. Those that came before me are thieves and robbers. Those who see before me must become blind first. So if there's any development, because those ways are the ways of depersonalization. Christ is human and God. He came so we could live abundantly, not to depersonalize. Depersonalizing is the Luciferic way. And because Lucifer is about freedom, it's about just seeking freedom from temporality. No, the Lord wants us in temporality to save it, not to collaborate with him, not to be just his extension, and also not to be up there in the clouds and not be participating in the saving. You see, it's not calling these other religions and humanisms, it's the devil. No, it's because there's a very subtle deception at the ground of it. Yes, they help people. Yes, they specialize, help them with their faculties, but it's ultimately depersonalizing. It's ultimately doing something that God didn't make us for. It's ultimately making you not a son. It's making you something that's no longer human. Because the ultimate divinity is person, is moral. The ultimate ground of reality is love. And so when you're depersonalizing, you're making yourself into Aramanic. You're making yourself into a piece of technology, which unfortunately is satanic. And again, there's a stigma with the word satanic, and there should be. But satanic means that dead technical will to power of technology. That's what it means. It's depersoned. Person isn't an additive. Person, the personal of the Father and of moral logic, is the ground of reality. It's gotten the wrong way around in modernity, and it takes all this practice to see the truth of that. That the truth is that the divine is a person and the Son is begotten. He's not a divine mover. He's not what the deists think. The Son's begotten from the Father. It's the personal and it's the word of the personal and of love that you show to him that he responds to. And that's what truly is divine. And so you're actually de-divinizing by doing these practices that depersonalize. That was the mistake. That's why those that came before him are thieves and robbers. And so he's restoring that sight to be able to see him working in creation. And you see that. You see the miraculous. My God. And it's proven through the Hermetic epistemic principle, which uses that's all I can say. It uses the different faculties and the epistemic principle to help you find the truth of the things that you see. The coincidence of all these things together. As I've got here, the light of the upper eye coinciding with what you're seeing miraculously in reality, something way above chance. Those things together, used and shown to you, and this happens. You will be astonished by what you see in this. Astonished. You'll just shake your head. You shake your head and go, my gosh, how wondrous is how you actually do work in creation. How you actually do. Once you have to stop sinning first, then you are granted. Then he shows himself to you. But it's just you shake your head in astonishment. And you can only tell Christians who understand. You go, who can I tell? I want to tell them about this. They just won't believe it. Right? You have to go through all this argument to try to show them. And they just won't believe it. My God, because those proofs they're personal. But also it's completely impossible that it's chance. Because you've seen it again and again. But it's not scientific. You can't set up an experiment. That's just not how it works. But it demonstrates itself to you in an unshakable way. And not just as a feeling or anything like that. In terms of just eyewitness fact, it's just so much above probability of chance. Yeah, you eventually become astonished at the miracles that occur again and again and the coincidences that occur again and again. And you're being careful. You're using the Hermetic epistemic principle. This is not just... like I've said so many times, it's not confirmation bias. I know all those things. I know the logical fallacies. I know all that stuff. But you'll just be astonished. And the coinciding of the different senses help prove it, right? Just like it does with consilience in your normal senses, where you can touch something, you can hear something, you can see something. Therefore, it helps you establish you have an eyewitness account of, okay, that's real. The same thing with the higher faculties, which we'll learn a little bit more about in the next miracle. But basically, there are two sights that are restored. But it's deeply related to how he works, both in you, metaphysically. This is a very metaphysical one, which I won't be able to... you could do half a stream on just this. But I've sort of articulated the basic outline of it, and that he is the sending and the sent. And also inside with you, once he is sent from the future, once he is sent, he is that sent that the pool is. So he's also with you until the end of time. In a very real way, he's been brought in because you've stopped sinning. Because the Logos is all these I ams. It's just underneath the factical world of the lie of modernity as it presents to you is him as all these different I ams that you can have a factical, real, true access to by going through this process, by participating in the religion. And how hard is it? That's why it's the crown of thorns, because the religion is constantly trying to show people that this is true. But the serpent is so crafty. Scientism is so crafty that's gotten in the way that you have to know and understand this deep philosophy of people like Heidegger to get to the position where you can see, especially intellectual types. You have to. But we are reaching a time where it's becoming available, where you see scientism failing, where you see quantum mechanics reveal that the will is at the ground of that. That observation, the human element, before there is energy, it's just compressed will. Just like matter is compressed energy. But I think that's everything for that one. But yes, you have to empty yourself of that form of vision first. And if you had any other faculties, and that's the thing with initiation too, that speaks to mysticism and initiation actually suits the more really rational types. It's fine for others to do it, but it's really, I'm just a normal, stable, rational guy. I liked science a lot when I was young and that sort of thing. It suits them better because they already do not see. The people that are more, they're a bit more unstable in mind and that sort of thing, they have to unlearn whatever that is. As the Lord says here, they have to become blind first to whatever that polluted. People that are into mediumship and that sort of thing, that has to actually be dissolved first. But the people that initiates are actually you're going through, you understand philosophy. That's what Hermetic philosophy is. And St. John of the Cross, people like this are very articulate and careful. The original theologians had this raw experience of theology itself as mysticism. That's what true theology and philosophy are. You can't be a true philosopher or a true theologian unless you have this raw experience, really. That's the truth of it, because it's the ground of all religion. And so what's restored is that sight. But I think we can move on now to the final one. Raising of Lazarus. And so all these things have been leading up to this raising. Lazarus is sick. Lazarus is a friend of Christ, just like his sisters are. His sisters provided the comforts of the oil, because Christ was also human, remember, on the feet. And also the other sister provided the lodgings and the money for the different places that they went. These were friends of Christ. And he isn't the archetype, the prototype, and these words are so technical, as if they exist somewhere in temporality. No, the eternal thought of God that is the initiate. Like I said, these miracles are always occurring. And so, anyway, I don't like using the word archetype because people think that's something in temporality when it's what is above the waters, what is above the firmament is where this comes from. And it exists always now because of what Christ did above the firmament. And this is the thing above the firmament that is the prototype, archetype of and all initiates and all initiation. And so everything is actually in this seed that was in the future, that was sent as a initial doxa to the apostles at the wedding. This is what we're all working towards, but it's also the future that they experience. They experience this in that first doxa, this complete doxa. They experienced it back then because of how temporality works, because the Lord is the future. It's very complicated, the old Christ being the future. But I think I've helped people understand with the last few streams. It's difficult, though. The old keystone. Our beloved keystone. But here it is. The sickness of Lazarus was not unto death, but for the glory of God, the doxa, the radiant activity, that the Son of God might be glorified, revealed as that very doxa, that very radiant activity of life, the resurrection and the life. Thereby. So that's from John. Not the radiant activity part, that's my addition. An addition. But his sickness is our sickness, man. This sickness we go through. This sickness, as I said earlier, you are already sick. You are sick with your will to power by not having God as the root of your experience, because you are fallen. When you incorporate, when you incarnate here, as it really is a sacrifice from where you came from. You come from the Father and incarnate. But you incarnate into a fallen state with derivative energies, with derivative wine, with that first wine, and the wine runs out, and you're sick, and you don't realize it. Modernity is sick, so depraved, so sick. I just have to go to the bathroom. We'll be back in 2 seconds, but think on that sickness of modernity while I'm gone, and I'll read the chats as soon as we finish our all of them, and I read them all last time as well for everyone who posted. Yes, this is live. Someone said, "Is this live?" last time, probably because they saw the nature video. But here's the nature again. I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. All right. Back we are. Back we go. Here we are again. Okay, everyone. Just a reminder, we'll have a group discussion in the Discord straight after the stream, the second part of the stream. Keeps going in the Discord. You can go to scottmanu.com/membership to join the Fellowship of the Ring. Fellowship of the Ring. Fellowship. Greenwood Fellowship. Okay. So, beloved friends, Lazarus. What happened here? Okay. So he could show that is Jesus. And really, this makes up. I've basically talked about it. But what we'll talk about Lazarus as this last is this first day of creation. Because the potentiality of the whole 7 days is in the first day of creation. The first day of creation is the Lord, who is ultimately potentiality, who is future. When you touch the future, you touch the first day of creation. That's what initiation is. Initiation is going to the initi. It's going to the initial stage of the microcosm, which is the image and likeness of God, which is why you start at the last day, or close to the last day, rather. But the initi, that's the point, is that you're going back. When you go to the ground through the practices, you are returning to the initial state, which is the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is at the ground, the essence, the base of the psyche, the base of the macrocosm, and also the ground of the macrocosm. The microcosm is the psyche, is the unconscious. That's what you're doing throughout this whole process. This healing puts you in orbit. Everything, every part, every faculty of your being is being healed to be one of these I ams. Because he is all these different I ams. I am the vine. I am the true vine. These are his version. It's a Christianizing of all your different faculties, which the yogis, unfortunately, the humanists, only go back to the prenatal part of that, which is the old Adam. The Christianizing of all your faculties, which have been healed throughout this whole miraculous process through all the collaboration that you do, because it's not as simple as that. But you are striving to be like him, to be him, to turn the non-likeness that you are into the likeness, to move towards the image and likeness. And I think the image and likeness is this day of creation, I think. Oh, no, that was the last one. But that's Yod. The potentiality, the future is in that Yod. From Yod He Vav He, the first cause and the end, the beginning and the end, that he is the future of all the rest of the steps is in potentiality at this step. Just like it is for raising of Lazarus, all of it. These play out in reverse because you have to go from the free state returning to him to go to the initi. And by reaching this last miracle, we reach the initi. We reach that pure let there be light. And you get insight into this miracle by reading the first day of creation when it talks about let there be light, the force that hovers over the waters. It's the returning of warmth to everything. But the point is, like I said, all the different faculties that we are, even if you go back to the prenatal state, are sick and have to be healed. In initiation, as I also said at the start of the stream, we go through a death. The death is not as sudden as it is for Lazarus. It happens over time. It's a contraction and an expansion, dying and living through collaboration with Christ. And the same thing happens to, of course, monastics and all of that. They go through the same thing, which is described by the dark night of the soul in St. John of the Cross. A contraction and an expansion. But any contraction is because his light is so bright. It's an overactivity of what you are and what's inside to you. That's why you experience it that way, because his light is so bright, the uncreated energy. And so what I should talk about now, I think I've talked about most of the stuff that to do with this. Here's a good point, though, that his sickness, and you see this, is not just, it's not just the of soul, it's all of them together, because he can't walk, because he's blind, because he's dead, he's a corpse. He's without movement, but he is also without soul and spirit and everything else that needs to be healed. So it's in the fact that's there. And so they're the same. Lazarus, come forth and let there be light is their equivalent, because Christ is all these things. But let's talk about the faculties for a moment. I've talked a little bit about this already, but these faculties that are the I am. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the bread of life. I am the door. I am the way, truth, and life. I am the true vine. These all point to these different faculties that are all being healed by him as you move towards him. And so when the yogis talk about it, I don't want to be conflicting towards them and the different religions. They're humanisms, though. They're dealing with these different faculties in the fallen state. And so, yes, that can help them when they're developing. Firstly, it's a specialization, or it's a going to the prenatal of the fallen, though. You're not escaping. You're not there's no other way except by Christ. He's the only person that can divinize all these different faculties. What they're doing is a humanism. And so what they call them, they call these faculties the lotus flowers. No. Or chakras or whatnot. No. That's pointing to, and what are they? Of course, they're intellectual initiative. But I'll explain what they really are ultimately, or moving towards the divine Adam, is these different I ams. That's what the faculties are supposed to become. Not what the humanisms that all the other religions talk about, which we're not going to bother naming. But what happens through all these healing? Revelation of wisdom revealed by him in the resurrection and the life of doxa. It's not abstract and transcendent, but full of warmth as the fire of Pentecost. I am the light of the world. Intellectual initiative becomes compassion-filled insight. I am the good shepherd. Creative word will become magical faculty of illuminating and consoling and healing. I am the bread of life. Humanist love that's sort of self-interested becomes a divine love. I'm the door. Science or knowing becomes conscience or your angel. The past is healed, but you have access to divine, like we said in when we were talking about the return of ensouled movement, the return of revelatory action as felt, as conscience. I am the way, the truth, and the life, the center of health that the humanist religions talk about becomes the center of holiness as something that is a raw fact of being, which is related to the nobleman. And I am the true vine, the derivative vital elan, which is talked about by Henry Bergson, which is derivative and usually spurred on by polemical energy, becomes a virginal Zoe, and in an inexhaustible source that you can pray for, and it's granted to you through collaboration. Now, these 7 things are related to, as we've talked about before in the mystic stream, different when you've gone through initiation, when you've purified yourself, because not before, because it's not trustworthy before, as the Orthodox are quite right to be careful of. Saint Teresa talks about 2 different things, which she calls intellectual vision, which is uncreated. It's not seen. It's sent as direct certainty, as infused certainty. That's related to the first 3 that I talked about. That's transsubjective, outside those first 3. And that I am the bread of life, that heart center of love, is what is in Christian mysticism, which is in Christian Hermeticism, called the fire of a mouse, which is a synthesis of both the horizontal and vertical of all these different faculties that you're moving towards. Because the other one is imaginary, what St. Teresa calls imaginary vision, which is extra subjective. It has the certainty of experience at first hand. That's related. And these are all related to faculties that will awaken through this raising of Lazarus. But if you want to know more about those different things and what St. Teresa talks about and what they mean, well, it's the feelings described in the Bible with the fire of a mouse, which is both those things at the same time. It's felt as what I mean by fire of a mouse. I mean the road to Emmaus. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, perhaps. When the apostles say, "Did our hearts not burn?" That's something you notice. You have to keep your attention on the emotive because it develops further and further and further the heart into an endlessly complex sense that can't be described as emotion, because what comes with it is infused certainty that you know it's from an objective source, and that's described by the saints, by St. Teresa, for instance, and St. John of the Cross, stuff like this. But I'm not going to go into much detail of that. I just wanted to describe how they're related to all the different raising of Lazarus, I ams, and the miracles are all connected to the total resuscitation of all the faculties of man, both vertical and horizontal. Senses that have been disconnected since the fall. Faculties that become available through this process, that are available to the saints. It's not often talked about, but they have these things. Like I was listening to a priest talking about the Orthodox, who should be a saint, Seraphim Rose, talking about his faculties like this, clairvoyance and that sort of thing, and his experiences of him knowing things about people without them ever telling them. This is what happens when you become a saint, and it can also be experienced in initiation. Again, it's basically the same thing. It's the same thing. But no, I want to say it's the same thing, but it's like monasticism. It's like that. But anyway, that's about it for what I wanted to talk about. Do I have anything else here? I'll just, for the moment, I'll go look at the old chats. Maybe I didn't turn my notes back on, so you probably didn't see the different things we were looking at with the raising of Lazarus. But I think you saw it at the start. But I'll just quickly look at, let's go to, have a look at some of our chats here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I can now see the chat, so I'm just going to jump along to the end and have a look at what everyone's saying, so I haven't missed anything. All right, where are we? Okay. Hello from Alaska. Hello, my friend. You're the person who's friends with the people at Harmony. I saw your chat last time. Thanks for watching, man. Would you ever do an interview with Peterson? Yeah, I'd speak to him, but I don't think he would be, it's about getting in contact with him. He's sort of at this, this place where I don't know why he wouldn't speak to someone like me at this time anyway. He only speaks, that's the whole problem with him and a lot of these other figures, people like Peterson, is they put themselves on a certain level. They don't reach down below to lift up talent. They wait till people already have 1 million subscribers or whatever. Shouldn't you go looking for that? Shouldn't you be a force for good in that way, looking for, talent and lifting it up, not just letting demon algorithms do it? Yeah, so no, that's never going to happen. If he wants to talk, I'd happily talk with him. He's helped a lot of people, but noetic prayer that happens without cease. Exactly, Pykalasta. And we must establish that. And it happens, it works. It happens and it works. So please get started. And I talk about the practices. I'm going to do the stream next week. I think I'll go into the practices and how they might interrelate, because some of our guys, it started to happen for them. 2 of our chaps in the Discord, So that's great news to hear. I couldn't be more a relief, just more a relief that I could help pass it on, because it is a real burden to go. You have to, though, because it is a temptation. It's a temptation to say, "Oh, at least I know. At least I know. Oh, thankful I've got this." What's that? What's that temptation? At least it happened for me. That's that nirvana again. That's that Luciferic. It's just wanting to check out. At least I have been given these great gifts, and what for? So other people can. You got to help other people. It's a temptation not to. So you got to wear the crown of thorns. I think that's all the chats that I can see. There's a few of you watching. Let me just refresh it just to make sure that no one else. All right, everyone, we're going to go over into the second part of the stream. Going to go over into the Discord, have a chat if anyone has any questions. And you could have sent through super chats. Oh, wait, that says top chat. Shit. Let me just check live chat. Oh, no, there wasn't much more. There was only a few other extra messages there, looks like. But yeah, we're going to jump over into the Discord. If you want to participate in the group conversation, you can go to scottmanion.com/membership to join the fellowship and be a part of it. There's a bunch of things listed there that you can participate in. Look forward to seeing you. And we'll always do these streams anyway. And thanks for participating. Thanks for your chats, everyone. Yeah, I'll see you over in the Discord, everyone. All right.